Okay, we're live. All right, well, hello and welcome everybody, and welcome to another episode of Game Changers. It's a speaker series we have at UVic to really showcase some of the amazing talent that we have at the university. And so you're in for a great ride today, so put your seatbelts on. It's going to be a lot of fun. I wanted to start off by acknowledging that we're here on the lands of the Lekwungen peoples, the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, and also pay my respects to the Saanich and Lekwungen peoples for their traditions that they hold today and keep this land in such a good place for us. And I pay my respects to elders past and present. So we're fortunate today. We've got somebody who's been here just a little over a year, I think, Heather? Yeah, and truly is, let's say, the Taylor Swift of art.
I wouldn't go that far.
So we're in for a really exciting session today. Here's how it's going to go. I am just going to hand over as quickly as I can because you don't want to hear from me. Heather is going to introduce herself. She's going to tell us a little bit about her journey, her life, her pathways here, and anything else that you think is relevant to the crowd. And then we'll flick it over to some questions and answers from you. But first, I've got a few questions I may ask, or some that come up as you're speaking. So that's enough for me. So allow me now to introduce the guest of the hour, Dr. Heather Igloliorte, and she's an Inuk Newfoundlander and a Nunatziavut. Nunatziavut, thank you. Beneficiary who holds the Canada Excellence Research Chair in Decolonial, Transformation, and Indigenous Art Practices in the Visual Arts Department here at UVic. So I'm just going to hand right over to Heather. It's
Thanks.
over to you.
Thanks, Kelly. Good morning. I'm Dr. Heather Igloliorte, or Igloliorte. I'll actually accept any pronunciation of my name. I get lots of different ways. Igloliorte is more of the Inuk way of saying it, and Igloliorte is a more anglicized way of saying it. I grew up in Happy Valley, Goose Bay. My father is an Inuk. He's from the community of Hopedale, and my grandparents are also from Hopedale. On my white side, my mom is a Newfoundlander. Her family is all from the little fishing village of Greenspond, which is around Bonavista Bay. And so I've got sealers and fishermen on both sides of my family, going back many, many generations. And I grew up in Happy Valley, Goose Bay, which is a community that was built around a military base in 1949. So I grew up kind of on a military base. It's a very small, remote community, although it was considered the big city where I grew up because it was a town of several thousand people. And my elementary school class was really quite diverse and global. Because we had military from all over the world in Goose Bay, I had, one of my friends was Dutch, and another one was a Black American, and another student was from Brazil. There were kids from all over the world in my class when I was a little girl. And of course also Inuit and Inuit First Nations and settlers from across Canada. So I lived in Happy Valley, Goose Bay until I went to high school. My dad is the first Inuk judge in Canada, or was. He's retired now. And he and my mom met at Memorial University. I'm just going to tell you my whole life story. I didn't plan for this. I'm just going to tell you everything about me. So my father went to a residential school. He went to the Yale School in Northwest River. Northwest River is about a 40-minute drive from Goose Bay, where I grew up. And he and my mom met in university, and then they taught, they were the two teachers at a little one-room schoolhouse in a small community in Newfoundland called Lark Harbor, or what they say Lark Arbor in Newfoundland, so they make the joke that it's LA. I'm going to LA for the weekend. and they taught at a little one-room schoolhouse until my father was recruited to go to law school, and he went to Dalhousie and went and did a law degree, and then he was actually one of the last judges in the country to be a magistrate before becoming a judge instead of a lawyer. That's just like a fun fact. He was invited to be on the Supreme Court of the province, and then he said he didn't want to go back and write the law exam at 60 years old, so he didn't want to pass the bar. And so, so my father was the provincial court judge for Labrador while I was growing up, and he would go up and down the coast and hold court in the community center or the little bar or wherever it was, and sort of travel up and down the coast all through my childhood. And then when I was going into high school, my father's position, he took over a position for another judge in Newfoundland for a couple of years, and then my family moved back to Labrador, but I went on to the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design. I always thought I was going to be an artist. When I was growing up, I had planned on being an artist. I really loved being at NSCAD. For a long time, I was the only Inuk who was at the university, and this was in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I don't think that there were a lot of Inuit, or I certainly didn't know of any other Inuit who were at my art school or other art schools. Tanya Tagaq, the famous musician, she had actually just graduated from NSCAD the year before I started. And so for a long time, people would think I was her because she was the only Inuk and then I was the only Inuk. And the first time I met her, she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I said, "No, it's okay." It's like, "No, it's great. Everybody thinks I'm cool." So I think that was like, it was a very normal experience for Inuit in any program going to university because just recently, the Yukon College turned into the University of the Yukon. But up until this point, there haven't been any universities in the Arctic. They've all been, there's been a scattering of colleges, but there hasn't really been a lot of post-secondary opportunities for Inuit. You have to leave the north and move south in order to go to university. And so knowing that and like having had that experience of being the only person at my school has really, I think, been quite formative to the way that I have tried to be when I became a professor.
Okay.
I can go back a little bit though. So I was the only Inuk at my art school. My brother actually came and joined. I think in my last year he came and transferred from UNB, and so then there were two of us. But last year on Instagram, my colleague Alethea Arnaquak Barrel, do you know who she is? She is she's a brilliant documentary filmmaker, and she posted a photo of herself at Ryerson. She was the only Inuk at Ryerson in the early 2000s. And she had shaved her head in art school. And then Lakalu Williamson Bathory, who is a performance artist, co-founder of Kagivut, which is a theater school in the north, and won the Sobey Award, not this year, but several cycles ago. Lakalu responded to that Instagram post with her own photo of herself in art school in Saskatchewan with a shaved head. And so then I responded to the both of them with a photo of me in art school with a shaved head. It's like a very art school thing to do in the early 2000s. And I just think it's so funny that the three of us, here we were, three women in different areas of the arts, all traveling south and going to being sort of the only person in our school at the same time, but we were three remarkably similar people doing the same, with the same haircut, in the early 2000s.
Do we have pictures of that haircut?
I don't have it here today, okay. But you can probably find it on my Instagram.
We'll get that and post it.
Yes, exactly. We'll change my my university profile photo to the shaved head. It really, I think, brings home how powerful it would have been had we known each other then and had we had that network and collective. The university was not a very safe place for me when I was in art school. There wasn't the discourse that we have today. There wasn't the awareness. It was certainly before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It was before the Aboriginal Healing Foundation. There just wasn't a lot of support for Indigenous students. And so I sort of carried that through into my work and my way of thinking about how to support Indigenous students broadly, but Inuit students really specifically.
So I want to go off script.
Yeah,
we're not supposed to do this. We're supposed to let you talk for 20
Let's
minutes
jump
and
in.
a half questions. I just want to go back. 16-year-old Heather.
Okay.
In Happy Valley.
Yeah.
You were an artist, aspiring artist.
I was in Corner Brook then. I was in Newfoundland for high school. Yeah.
Your art, was it good, bad? How do you think of it now?
I got an entrance scholarship to NSCAD. I think I was
good.
pretty good.
Yeah,
I think the thing about art school or art school is that you're a great artist in your class, and then you get to art school, and then everybody's great because they've all also applied and been accepted to art school, and so you get a little bit more intimidated in the beginning, and I think it's really important to make friends.
And was your art school, was it competitive, or was it actually, did you all work together and collaborate and actually rise everybody's boat?
That's a great question. I feel like NSCAD was a little bit competitive, but a little bit not. We didn't really, when I was there, we didn't have letter grades. We had high pass, pass, marginal pass, and fail. And to
Okay.
fail, the professor needed to not know who you were, basically. But to get a high pass, you had to sort of stand out. I think it said in the syllabus that only 2% of the class could get high passes. So, I failed a class, I got high passes. So, up and down, like every undergrad, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Back to your story.
So I was at NASCAD, and I fully expected to go on and do an MFA. And the summer that I graduated was 2004, and I was waitressing at the TGI Fridays at the casino. And at the end of the summer, when I was planning on, I was going to work that summer and then save up. And right at the end of the summer, Hurricane Juan hit the East Coast. Do you remember that, 2004? Yeah. And I wasn't injured in the storm, but the day after the storm, the power was out all over the city. Halifax was probably a lot like here, like lots of very tall trees that would line the streets. And so after the big storm, like the city was flooded, like all through downtown and up into the neighborhoods. And a lot of big old trees were knocked over. And so to remove them, the city, it took 5 weeks in some places to get power restored. Like it was a real emergency. And I had one friend who lived on the same block as the nurses' dormitory for the hospital. And so he had power back the first night. And so we all went over to his place and we played board games because there was nothing else to do. And I like to joke that I played the game of life and then it changed my life. We were up until, 1 o'clock in the morning playing board games. And then a friend came over to give us all a ride home. And we were, do you know Halifax?
Yeah, absolutely.
So on Quinpool Road, there's that, at the edge of the Commons, there's that big intersection, probably like an old horse-drawn carriage road, and it's like 10 streets that feed into it. And we were going through this big intersection, and a car came down Roby Street. I found out later he was a newspaper delivery driver, and he must have just fallen asleep at the wheel, and he T-boned us, and we spun around and hit a light post. And I was on the side that hit the light post. My friend who was in the middle seat, she had to be medevaced out, like a helicopter came and got her, or an ambulance came and got her. She had a chip in her spine, she needed surgery, but like I got out of the car and I felt fine. And the paramedic came and checked us out and said we were clear to go. And I walked home with my boyfriend that night, and I felt fine, and then the next morning I woke up and I was black and blue all down the entire left side of my body. I'm left-handed. And I had just like bruises and so much pain that I couldn't move. I couldn't move my head. I just like radiating pain. And then that began 12 months of physiotherapy. It was like the worst and also most boring time of my entire life. I had permanent damage to my upper left trapezius, which is like this whole part of my body. And so the doctor said that I didn't know when I would regain strength in my left arm, and I couldn't sit or stand or lie down for more than half an hour, 45 minutes without being so uncomfortable that I had to keep changing position. And then I was court ordered to be in physiotherapy for 8 hours a day, where I would do exciting things like pedal like this with my hands, and then like try to lift a beanbag or like try to push a beanbag. And I went from half a pound to 1 pound to 3 pounds, like it was a very slow recovery. And during that time I thought, I don't know if I'll ever be able to lift a paintbrush again. I'm in so much pain I could barely function in my daily life, let alone like go back to making art. And so I thought, this is going to be a long, slow recovery. While I'm working on it, I should look into other programs. I still wanted to go back to school, and so I applied. I've joked before, I thought I went on the internet, but I couldn't have Googled it. It was before Google. It was like 2004. So I probably asked Jeeves or something, like, where can I study Inuit art in Canada? And I found Carleton University popped up. They had George Swinton, who's actually a quite famous Inuit art historian, but at NASCAD I'd had no Indigenous art education at all, so I didn't know who he was. And I saw that there had been some courses offered there, and that Mame Jackson and George Swinton had taught there before. And so I just applied to the master's program at Carleton, and I was very fortunate that I'd had a minor in art history from NASCAD. This last semester that I was at NASCAD, I was working towards a painting and drawing major and minor. And the registrar contacted me and said, you're only 6 credits away from having a minor in art history. It makes you more of a diverse applicant. And so in my last term, I took 2 classes in art history, It was probably like Egyptian art and television criticism, like two just random things. And because I had that minor, I was very fortunate. I was able to get into the master's program. And I mean, I was an art student through and through, and the people that were in my program that year were so brilliant and so intimidating to me because they had, advanced degrees in art history and honors degrees. And so I felt like my learning curve was just like way, way up. But I became really interested in what I was doing there. I went there with not very big, ambitious plans. I wanted to do something until I could get back to being an artist. And then when I started, so I thought, okay, I'll write about a couple artists from Labrador. I'll just write a thesis on John Terriac and Gilbert Hay, Shirley Morehouse, artists that were quite famous where I was from. And when I got out to Carleton and started to want to do research on these artists, I couldn't find anything on them. Almost nothing, there was nothing from Nunatsiavut. So I grew up on, Nunatsiavut is the most easterly and smallest, but first self-governing territory of Inuit. That's on the Labrador coast. We were the last to ratify our land claims, but that was in 2005. But we're right around the corner from Nunavik. In fact, I have relatives from Nunavik. We're very closely related. And then there's also Nunavut and then the Inuvialuit region in the west. And so the Nunavik and Nunavut have thousands of books and articles and exhibitions and profiles of artists and information and archives and so on about them. And I was really surprised that there was nothing from Labrador that was the same. I just assumed it would be exactly equal. And not only was there nothing from Labrador, there was no explanation about why there was nothing from Labrador. There was just we didn't exist. And it was wild to me because everybody I knew in Labrador was an artist of some kind. Everybody was, my dad liked to draw, my brother was a photographer, my other brother was a painter, and my grandmother was a famous seamstress, and my aunt made dolls. Everybody was an artist. Right. And so it seemed like this weird mystery to me. And so luckily I was in Ottawa where all the museums are. And so I could go and talk to curators and say, where are the Inuit from Labrador in the art history? And kind of bizarrely, none of them really knew. They said, we don't know why we didn't go to Labrador. And so I realized that this was actually a huge project that I needed to I was I need to do a doctorate. I need to get into this.
Right? Yeah.
As you do. And so I wrote something else for my master's thesis. I wrote about the beginning of Inuit art and about the Inuit who were involved with a southern Canadian guy who's credited with being involved in the beginning of the art movement, James Houston. And so I wrote about an early initiative that he had piloted and then kind of moved away from. And then decided that I was going to write my PhD on Nunatsi Bumiyut, and I did a 400-year history. Which was the first of its kind, and then that led to me doing an exhibition after I graduated and doing a bunch of other projects. But what I found out, I'll tell you the end of the story. What I found out is that what had happened is that Newfoundland and Labrador was the last province to join Confederation, and so we joined in 1949. James Houston, who I'd written about, not knowing about the connection, who I'd written about in my master's thesis, he had been hired. He'd gone up north, it's a longer story, but he went up north in 1948 and had discovered that Inuit were still making art and actually had a really exciting creative practice. He'd gone up north to draw them and then realized that they were artists too. And so he went back to La Guilde in Montreal, and together they collaborated with the Hudson's Bay Company and the federal government, the Federal Department of Mines and Resources, to purchase work in the north and then sell it in the south. And so that became very, very big in a short period of time. So that happened in 1948 and 1949, 1950. And while they were doing that under the auspices of the federal department, Newfoundland and Labrador joined Confederation, but we were the last province, to take all the considerations for Indigenous peoples out of the terms of union. Okay. And so it had been written into the first draft, and then historians hypothesized that the politicians at the time had decided to do an experiment to see what happens when you just disenfranchise Indigenous peoples. No Indian Act for the Mi'kmaq or Innu, and no considerations for Inuit under the federal department. And so when they were getting funding to go to these federally supported communities, it was like there was an invisible wall between Labrador and the rest. And it was so perpetuated by this federal versus not federal consideration that the people who were doing it didn't even know why they weren't going to those communities. I talked to people who were like, we don't know why we didn't go to Labrador. We just knew that these were the communities that we served. And so that actually was really, it was very disappointing, but also it really made clear what had happened there. And it helped me to see that it wasn't because of a lack of artistic talent or of creativity or skill, but actually that Nazi Vomiat art had persisted in spite of a complete lack of federal or provincial support and without even real recognition about our indigeneity as people. Even the igloo tag, if you're familiar with that iconic symbol, even the igloo tag, we weren't allowed to use it until the 90s. So Inuit and Labrador, when they got it, they were like, thanks. And finally, you're calling us real Inuit. So that was sort of the research trajectory. And so when I wrote that long history, and it was a lot of people really trying hard to do things in a very grassroots kind of way, but never having that concerted support that the other regions had. So when I graduated, I was invited to work on my first partnership grant with Anna Hudson, who's at York University. And she kind of said, you can do whatever you want, I'll just give you funding. She was like, let's put it into the grant application and see what happens. And so she was incredibly generous to me as a young scholar. Right. And I went back to my community and I didn't know what to do. And I just went and just talked to people. I took a big chunk of cash, very expensive to travel in the north. And had the great opportunity to go and just talk to people and say, what are your challenges? What are the barriers to your success? How do these things impact your creative practice? And then through that process, we decided that we would do a big exhibition, and we created one called Sakiayok, which means to be visible. And it toured across Canada.
That for a little while? You just said, does it change your creative practice? I'm interested. So all of a sudden, you go from focusing on art to having this crazy notion you might want to be academic.
Yes.
God knows why, but you do, and you pursue this history channel. So you're on divergent pathways, but is there an association that helps you with either one, that makes it either stronger, or do you have to give up something to be expert?
That's a great question. I certainly gave up being an artist. It was just during the pandemic that I started beading again. Okay. I'm a very bad bead worker, but I'm more of a bead hoarder than a bead worker. I like to buy the beads and then put them on a shelf.
A bead keeper.
A bead keeper, exactly. A bead keeper is nice because it implies that I may use them in the future. So just like a dragon on my treasure.
So it consciously made you give up your artistic practice?
Well, it did because I just became a writer. Also because in all of that history, in all of even the thousands of catalogs and books and so on that had been created, I realized how few things had been written by Inuit. Yeah. We're talking a dozen articles or exhibition catalog essays over the history of 50 years, And so. And when I was looking at it, I was like, where are all the Inuit writers? Where are all the Inuit curators? Why don't we have them? And that sort of led to my next big project, which is the mentorship kind of aspect of it, is that when I was a student, I would go and talk to these curators, really well-meaning, lovely people, and I would say to them, and they would say oh, we're so glad you're here as a young Inuk curator. We've been waiting for Inuit curators to appear. And I remember thinking oh yeah, when are the other young Inuit curators going to? Not that I was the first one or the only one. There have been people throughout history, but a lot of them were artists who kind of went back to their artistic practice. And it seemed unusual to me to be the only person who was working at being a curator. I started when I was in grad school. I had a job at the Carleton University Art Gallery. They have a big Inuit art collection, and I'd sort of been perpetuating that, and I was talking to curators and saying well, you have the position. You could be hiring an assistant curator. You could be training someone. And so just last week I was giving a guest lecture for Inspire Nunavut. That's my colleague Cora DeVos's. She teaches a course where she has students from across Nunavut that all want to they want to have artistic small businesses. Mm-hmm. And so I went and I was talking to them. And one of the students just last week said to me, what was the biggest barrier to your success? What's the biggest challenge that you faced? And I thought about it for a second, and I said, I think it was just my not realizing that I could do things that I was expecting Halana, white people, to do, the people in positions of power. The biggest shift for me was just saying, oh, I'm a professor now. I can apply for the grant. I can do this thing. I can help people. And so when I started at Concordia University, which is where I was before I came here, I was there for 11 years, 20 2012 until last year. And I was talking to another prof, and I was saying, like, when are people going to get around to creating more space for mentorship? And someone said, you could do it. And I was like, no, can I? Could I do that? And that was, and then, I was going to go for a partnership development grant, which is like the launching grant. And then another colleague was like, why don't you just go for the full thing? And I was like, can I do that? And just kind of giving myself permission to do the ambitious thing and to try and help people. And so we started a program. I was successful on the first try with a partnership grant for a project called Inuit Futures in Arts Leadership, which is a 7-year partnership that's just winding down this year. Yeah. So that, thank you, whoever just said, ooh. Ooh. It was a training and mentoring initiative that that finds the Inuit who are all by themselves in art schools, like I was, and creates a network of peers for all of the students. We'd get them together in gatherings, and we did, it's like a curator at Lethbridge and a student at NASCAD and another student at another university, and like the students on the East Coast, Emily Carr. Yeah. And so we would find those students just by word of mouth, by connections through communities or like posting on Facebook, and found students and then connected them to opportunities with mentorship, with other Indigenous curators or museum staff or what have you, to train people into the leadership positions in the arts. So everything except the artist positions, basically. Like, where are all of the film editors and the collections managers and the the writers and the publishers. So
how do you keep that going? Like, so you got a 7-year grant. Grants end, and we're hoping at the end of the story as well. It's now being funded, sponsored, and it's going to continue forever. Is that a good story, or?
I mean, yes and no. We worked with over the 7 years. We found. Like in mentorship positions specifically, like 1-year positions, we worked with about 50 students, which we did not expect that there was that many that would be found. That's what I wrote into the partnership grant, but I didn't actually expect to be able to do it. And then when we, over the course of that time, like all of those students that we worked with, that we found across the country, they are all still working in the arts. Like every single one of them has either stayed in university or gone back to school or is pursuing higher education, or they are working in leadership positions. One of the students is now a co-executive director of Alethia's film company, Red Marrow Media. There's another one who's one of the lead editors at Inuit Art Quarterly. There's another student who's like they're all just doing amazing things. Yeah. It's been a huge success, and I think it is the network building, like bringing them all together so that they know that there are other people like them. And they're not the only person living in the South, like going to art school by themselves, that they actually have a network of peers that they can be friends with, and we travel the world with them and so on. And just really showed them that they also can just do it themselves, and that they can do it with their friends and so on. Yeah. So keeping it going with partnership grants or with any kind of grant, if you create something and it's really successful and it's fantastic and you come to the end, you can't just do it again. You have to change it in some way. And so we are working on now a new application with a bigger group of folks in order to expand it through, I think what we learned over the course of this grant was that there are Northerners everywhere, like in the Yukon, Northwest Territories, Alaska, in Sami territory, that would also benefit from a program like this. That's what everybody said, oh, I wish we had this in Greenland, So now we're hoping to work with partners internationally to make it a more circumpolar global project.
And how do you, when you think of these things that you're doing, do you often think of what you want to leave behind as either a legacy or a gift to whoever?
Ooh, that's a big question.
That's a big question. But does that motivate you or help drive what you're doing?
I think what is really satisfying about the Inuit Futures Project and like working with Indigenous youth is that that once they get to a position where they have some power, they're also going to open the door for more people behind them. Right. And so I don't really need to worry about leaving behind a legacy on my own because I know that everyone is going to be helping everyone else. Like that's as Indigenous peoples, this is what we do with the, in Inuit community, when you have, like the greater leadership position you take on, the more obligation you have to give back and to work in service. And so like the higher up you go in your career, in your community, the more you're meant to be giving. And so I think that knowing that they are all also going, as they rise, they will also be giving back is like, it's,
And how does that kind of work? academic settings are very selfish. The way we create incentives and promote people using our old colonial system is very much, based on I better just button down and do things for myself. How do you deal with that tension? Or how do you deal with the system?
Yeah, no, I think that bringing people in and working together with them is, I try not to get too into the competitiveness of that, because a lot of when I do receive grants, it goes out into community anyway. It's like paying artists and paying people fairly, and compensating elders for their time and so on and so forth. On my first day of grad school at Carleton. They were doling out the placements, the mentorship program that comes with a part of that master's program, and there was one at the museum, what was then the Museum of Civilization, is now the Museum of History, and there was one position that was an Indigenous arts position, and then there was another student in the class who wanted it with me, and the professor was like, well, you're going to have to decide which one of you gets it and how do you want to do that, and the both of us said, well, could we do it together? And she was like, well, that's never been done before. We're like, but can we just ask them? like maybe we could share it, so I think that's the, starting from way back when and coming into the present, just thinking how can we share this instead of how can we fight for it?
Yeah. Okay. I know we want to get to some questions in the audience. I just wanted to ask you last one. So we're very honored to have brought you here as a Canada Research Chair. And the title is Decolonial and Transformation in Indigenous Art Practices. Can you talk to me a little bit about the decolonial piece and then the transformative, and are they necessarily coupled or are they necessarily different? Or what's your feelings around that chair, and what would you want to accomplish 5 years down the track in that role as chair?
That's a great question. So for the chair, there's sort of 4 big trajectories of the work, and so mentorship continues to be a major area, and I'm a curator, so creating exhibitions that engage the public in decolonial and indigenizing transformational work, that's really important as well. I've been doing some really interesting work with artists who are working in multimedia and new media practices, VR, 360 film, and that's really exciting to me, so that's another big part of it. And then the 4th is policy development, which is what I hope will be the most transformational and the most decolonial. I say to my students, decolonization is for everyone. Right. Indigenization is to be led by Indigenous peoples, but we can all be a part of the work of decolonization. And so what I've learned over the last 20 years working with institutions is that exhibitions engage the public, but they don't decolonize the museum. The museum, the structures that we've built around institutions like post-secondary or museums, art galleries, are the foundations of them are colonial because they have been built. They were established, hundreds of years ago, and we are still working through those foundations. And so you need to engage at the highest level and change policies that, that's the tedious and kind of boring work, but it's what has to be done in order to make things better for people who work at the entry level of all those institutions.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, I'm sure people have a few questions. Does anybody want to ask one? The way it needs to work is because you don't have microphones and we're being recorded. I'll repeat the question. Does anybody get something they want to ask Heather? You're such a shy crowd. Yeah, please.
I was hoping you could talk about your journey with the Inuit Art Foundation and how you obtained your position. Was it from being an artist? Was it from your education? Was it from being inspired?
So she's asking how I got my position with the Inuit Art Foundation. I'm the president of their board. And I actually worked with them when I was a grad student. When I first moved to Carleton, they used to be based in Ottawa, and now they're in Toronto. But I joined their board again in about, I think I'm at the end of my second term, so I'm about to be done. So 6 years ago, I think. I joined their board, and my journey with them was actually first as a student, and then as someone who, we had Inuit Art Quarterlies in my house when I was a kid. My dad was a subscriber. And I remember, don't tell them, I remember cutting them up and making collages and doing things with the magazine. They're beautiful magazines. And so wanting to be a part of that, and then I did a little bit of writing for them when I was starting out in university. The former director, Mary Bell, was actually super supportive of my career. She wanted me to be the next editor of the magazine. I said, that looks like a lot of work, no thank you. But before she retired, I was working there. My cousin Philip, who I hadn't met, who was from another community in Nunatsiavut, worked at the gift shop. Like, it was a really great place to like make connections with other Inuit artists and with other Inuit folks. But I became the board president because I saw that they needed the service to be done, that there was a lot of work to be done as an organization, and so I wanted to be a part of growing it to where it is today. When the Inuit Art, if you're not a subscriber, you should be a subscriber. It's my presidential duty to say. It started in the 80s as like a newsletter, and it was very much focused on the collectors and the dealers and the like market for Inuit art. And it continued quite successfully over the next like 30-ish years, and then in the early 2000s, after Mary Bell retired, the organization went a little bit dormant, and it was even temporarily closed down. And then and then a group of artists and curators and scholars revived it and brought it back. And the person who is still the director, the executive director, at one point she was the only employee of the organization. And so I was like, you need a lot of support. And then they hired a person part-time to be the part-time editor. And then the two of them just like brought the magazine back to life. And then the organization just started to grow exponentially, going on to eventually include, now we have a full 50% of the staff of 30 are Indigenous peoples, and a third total are Inuit specifically. And we have Inuit working all over the north. The writers have become lots of Indigenous peoples are writing for the magazine. They pay really well. Like, there's been a lot of really great steps, including working with organizations like the Canada Council for the Arts to start funding Inuit art directly. So like, there's been a lot of really exciting advancements, and I wanted to be a part of it. Thanks for your question. Did I answer it? Okay.
Thanks, great question. Any other questions? Because if they're not, you have to listen to me ask questions.
Hi.
I'm just wondering, now you're here, and your new role and your work here, how are you engaging with Indigenous artists or Indigenous in the arts here on this side of the continent?
That is a great question. So my new research project brings together artists from throughout the Pacific, and I do this because it's like from Alaska all the way down to Australia, New Zealand, Hawaii. So artists from throughout the Pacific and the Circumpolar. I actually have been very lucky, very fortunate to get to participate in a lot of like curatorial or scholarly exchanges with artists from throughout the West Coast, and then also around the circumpolar world. And what I've found is that the circumstances, conditions, like materiality, way of being in the world can be quite different, but there are many commonalities and things that could be shared. And so a big part of the CERC research is bringing together people from the Northwest Coast into conversation with folks from Alaska and from Hawaii, from Sapmi, from Norway, and working together in order to generate new knowledge across Indigenous peoples. It's difficult. We had a meeting the other day, and it was at 9 a.m. here, which is 6 a.m. in Hawaii, which is like 1 o'clock in the morning in Australia. So not everybody attended the meeting. And so we're going to host another one. And so it really does mean that getting together face to face is really important, because we're in such different time zones that it's very hard to communicate. And so our first meeting, we're going to be bringing a lot of people here to Lekwungen territory in, I think it's May, at the end of the semester, maybe probably in this room, and then hopefully getting out on the land as well, and really starting to build those relationships so that we can do cross-Indigenous partnerships, projects, artistic initiatives. It's very exciting. Thanks.
Ian.
When I was hearing you speak, I was thinking about some of these Inuit artists that I've met, and I spent a lot of time up in Pangnirtung, and in particular I was thinking about Ilisippi Ishuta. And a lot of these artists are actually knowledge keepers themselves, and they have knowledge of the culture expressed through the art itself. And just your thought of the role of the artist in the context of community and in the context of academia, because a lot of these folks are the equivalent of people with PhDs. They just express it in lots of different ways, and just your thoughts on that, because the role of the artist seems so central to community, and how we as academics can support that. And obviously that's what you're doing through your work.
I think it was Elisabeth that did a big series on climate change that she was noticing in her community as well. It was like drawing pictures out of what was happening in the community. I think that there's a lot of folks who are based in the north right now, artists and others, who are like witnessing that happening in real time. And so all of their deep knowledge about how things have always been is put in really sharp contrast with how things are rapidly changing right now. And I think that there's a huge contribution to be made there if we can respect that they have those contributions to share, equal to a scientist who's going up and measuring. Like what they are observing in their daily lives is so critically important. Investment in issues like what's happening in climate, but articulating that through the visual arts is a big part of what we want to do as well. And other issues of like, is climate change social justice? I don't know. I feel like it's so much bigger than that, but like really just wanting to bring that to the fore is a big part of what we're doing. So we've got the Taxutic Lab, which is going to be a research creation lab, which is in the Visual Arts building here. It's going to be launching in late January. And through that work that we're doing there, we're working with artists who want to share these kind of stories and bring them to broader audiences. And so I'm hoping to partner with CERC, who's based on the mainland. Do we say the mainland here?
You can say mainland.
That's what you say in
Absolutely.
Newfoundland.
Yeah,
you call it the
same.
mainland. So,
Same. Yeah.
Dr. Isla Myers-Smith is a climate scientist who's been working in the north. And so she's been working in the Inuvialuit part of the Western Arctic. And we want to take the scientific drone photography and drone video footage that she's been taking and then turn it into a multimedia installation project that really shows the world what's happening there. She has some really I don't know if we want to end this on a terrifying note, but she's got some very scary footage of what it looks like when the permafrost melts, because it's like the permafrost is the kind of the middle layer of the land, and it is just melting out of the earth and creating this very like mucky, everything that was solid is turning into, is like melting into the sea. And she's got some very dramatic footage from a heat wave that happened last summer, where the land is just sliding into the water. And so we want to take that and show it to people. I think that there's this idea that, if we're in Canada, we're in the northern part, climate change isn't going to be so bad for us. And if it gets bad, we'll just move further north. And I think that a part of that research and a part of like, you need to see it, where the visual art component comes in, is that you need to appreciate that there is nowhere else to go, that we are, we need to fix it here where we are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely right. It's a shocker. Christiane, yeah.
I'm from Quebec, so in the private galleries in Quebec City or Montreal, the Indigenous art that was sold was mostly from the north. I don't know if there was Inuk or just Inuit people. So the one that the Mohawk, or there are artists, I know there are some, but it never made its way to public art gallery. So now I live in the West. There's Indigenous art everywhere, but I don't see Inuit art or Inuk art as part of,
What's here? Well,
it's in Canada.
I think it's in all of the, there are so many incredible artists here on the Northwest Coast. Like you could fill countless institutions with the brilliance that's here. I think that Quebec, because McGill, because Montreal was such an important center for the early Inuit art industry, that I think that the communities in Quebec, with Nunavik being above it, really had a very strong relationship, and that leads to many collections of Inuit art. But I've actually never been to any institution in the world that didn't have, if I'm in Germany, they're like, you want to see our Inuit art collection?
Right.
Or like in South Africa, they have Inuit art, and in Australia, they have Inuit art. I've never been to a tiny little house museum that didn't at least have a box of ivory miniatures. Like Inuit art is quite prolific. Maybe not all from the Canadian part of the Inuit art world, but certainly from Alaska or from Greenland, it's everywhere. Thanks. Hi. Sure.
Oh, sure, yeah. Double the donation, that's all.
I'm just super interested in research creation and research creation labs. Could you tell us more about that?
So for anyone who is not familiar with the term, because it is kind of a new term in the research world, research creation is simply research that has a creative outcome rather than like a report or an article or journal or so on. And so when you are doing research for the creation of art, that is what research creation. It doesn't have to take place in a lab, obviously, but we want to create a site where artists feel like they can be doing that work and that it has a platform. It's not all digital media art. Anything that's done that's based in a research background and then translated into a visual or performing arts outcome is research creation. But there is certainly a very interesting digital media component to the work right now because, of course, we live in a digital space, and it's also quite engaging to do digital outputs of work. If you look at the past winners of the Sobey Art Award or like where the art world is focused right now, I think that we are in a very much a research creation kind of a space. People want to make not just art for art's sake, but art that changes the world, and so I think that that kind of work is really at the fore of a lot of people's concerns, because if you're talking about art that leads to climate action or art that leads to social justice action or art that investigates historical injustice, all of that has a research foundation to the work. So we don't know everything that's going to happen in the lab. It's going to be a big community space. We want to be able to invite local artists in. We want to invite local students and the local community. One of our research assistants also works at the Friendship Center here, and so we're hoping to build on that connection in order to make sure that the community feels like it's their space. We want Indigenous and other BIPOC students to really feel like it's a welcoming space for them. And then we want to have international profiled artists come in and scholars and be in residence in the lab as well, so that there's always kind of dynamic things happening. Some things that are for everybody, some things that might just be for Lekwungen people, some things that are just for Indigenous students, some things that are open to the public. And I think having that kind of shifting levels of access and opportunities for people will keep it quite dynamic.
Can we just maybe build on that for a second?
Yeah.
And because we've got a few minutes left, I want to get a couple of more questions in. I'm just thinking, you made a comment earlier that museums, art galleries are very colonial. So, as a Canada Excellence Research Chair, we're going to write you a check for $1 billion. What are you going to do? How are you going to...
Everybody heard that, right?
Yeah, everybody heard that. How are you going to replace what you think, these art galleries and museums? What would your vision be for, I guess, decolonizing those structures? What would they look like? And you started to answer that, I think, a little bit when you were talking about what you're doing in your lab. But is there something specifically you could say across this country, this is what I would do?
Well, there's like micro level things that we want to see change right away. Like there is just, like very sort of basic things. And then, of course, there's like big long-term plans for things. And it's a complex question because it has to do with repatriation is a complex question. Do we want to give everything back to community? What is the value of institutions holding people's cultures in their trust? Not every community wants everything back, so to speak, but sometimes, and there is great value in being able to go to a place and see something that is from another place. Museums have a large educational role to play. But then there are some things that should not be in museum collections that are part of that history of the theft or disenfranchisement of Indigenous peoples. And so, those are big questions about how to change institutions. But there's also just like baseline things around hiring policy and practices, like HR stuff, like human resources kind of level things. Wanting to say, for example, that like when you hire an Indigenous person, there should always be 2 people. Changing the board structure, making sure you have Indigenous peoples all throughout the organization and not just at the top and the bottom. We do get into this kind of a sandwich effect, I think, very often, where you've got Indigenous leadership and then you've got a lot of entry-level Indigenous folks, and then the in-between, it's like that's a big part of Inuit Futures too, is like, where are the editors? Where are the publishers? Where are the mentors in that middle part that really make sure that the whole organization works in an Indigenous way? So there's a lot of ways to answer that question. I read this this great article. I think it was from ICOM, like the International Museums Association, but it seemed like it was a part of a series, but it was a museum director writing about 100 years in the future, looking back on the progress that their museum had made over the last 100 years, like sort of speculative fiction. And she was talking about, like, wasn't it amazing when we figured out the technology in order to 3D print in any material so that we could 3D scan objects of cultural significance and make recreations of them so that we could return the original back to the community, but still have the object or the item, let's say a mask, in the museum for people to have. And then once we did that, because it was 3D scanned and an exact replica, we didn't have to put them behind glass anymore. Anybody
Right.
could come in and touch it because we could always remake it. And so that also made it better for audiences because you could actually engage with the things that are in the collections. And it's like that kind of big thinking that I think is really inspiring
Yeah.
and exciting to think about. Like, how will technology in the future enable us to kind of have it both ways with
Sure.
collections?
No, that's great.
Yeah.
So, we'll try to get that $1 billion in soon. Okay. So one last
Please.
question, if it's quick, because we have to wrap up soon.
Three tiny little questions.
Okay.
What was your academic home at Concordia? And
I was in art history at Concordia. I'm an art historian in the visual arts department here.
So
Yeah.
that's the question. I really appreciated what you said about research creation. And having never gotten the research creation grants and never feeling like the Canada Council grants or the BC Arts Council grants are really understood in the same way as tri-council funding, I'm on a research creation dichotomy curious, and you moving from art-based practice at NASCAD,
Yeah.
and then getting a PhD, and then going to art history, and then coming into visual art and having a lab there. I guess just what I want to say is, I wonder sometimes if there's this need to justify artistic practice through this lens of research creation. If you look at the sort of definition of research, it's the creation of new knowledge. And so the creation of any cultural artifact is new knowledge. So being in a fine arts department for 20 years, I've noticed this need to justify.
Yeah.
And that the funding doesn't necessarily go to the artist. But you've been in both worlds, and now your home, academic home, is visual art. So that's the last question really is, how is that, and why? And why is that the right academic home?
You raise many good points. And let me first just say, I've never checked the box for research creation or applied for a research creation grant because I know as an art historian, that's not for me. So I'm creating opportunities for research creation with artists through my funding, but I don't think I would get a research creation grant. I disagree with the notion that exhibitions cannot be research creation, but the funding model says that they cannot because they think it's knowledge mobilization. And I'm like, you haven't been to an exhibition that's really engaging. If you think it's just an exhibition is not a paper. It's more engaging than that. But that is all to say that I haven't gone into, I would never go into research creation funding or check that box. It's not on the new PG because I feel like it's actually too far outside of what research creation is by that definition. And I think that, and I hope that it's artists who decide, who are on the juries for research creation applications. And I don't think that they would consider what we are doing fundable in that way, which is not to say that it's not research creation, but not fundable. Or not who it's for when you check that box. To your bigger question about the justification of research creation as a way to get access to that, I don't know that I can speak to it because I've never been on a jury for research creation either. I don't know what the decision-making process is like for that. I feel like sometimes that the funding agencies themselves don't really know what research creation is, or there's still not a really great definition of that. And I think that there's some advocacy work to be done there for sure.
Heather, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for the conversation today. It's been absolutely amazing. We're absolutely thrilled that you chose to come to UVic. We couldn't be
I'm very happy
more
to be
proud
here.
of that. And I think the Canada Excellence Research Chair is it's going to just make changes. It sounds like, right? And with that $1 billion, it's going to be absolutely amazing. But I just want, on behalf of all of us sitting here, just thank you for an absolutely fantastic conversation today. So
I want to thank everyone who supported the creation of the application. It was a 2-year process. This is the only one in the arts, full stop, across the country. And it felt like a long shot to me when we were applying for it. And I know it was a lot of work on UVic's part to make this happen. So I just want to express my gratitude for that.
All right. Well, thanks,
Thank you
Heather.
all.